A suspicious fire swept through an apartment, killing 2 young women. The cause of the fire and the identity of the victims were unclear. But a closer look at the fire scene revealed something hidden in the ashes. Could gas chromatography, a burned pair of eyeglasses, and a half-smoked cigarette solve the case? On a spring night in March of 1999, firefighters in Iowa City rushed to an apartment building engulfed in flames near the University of Iowa campus.
District 1, Engine 2, you're responding to also to the structure fire. You need a second ambulance down there?
Now we have another victim. We will be removing 1 victim.
When they arrived, they had fire blowing out windows and doors of the apartment building. Immediately had the opportunity and the necessity to initiate an aggressive fire attack.
Just inside the entrance, firefighters found what appeared to be a body. Then in the back bedroom, another gruesome discovery.
They were unable to see, and so had to use the just feeling their way around the apartment and checking on the bed. They found the second victim.
A driver's license found next to one of the bodies belonged to 29-year-old Laura Watson Dalton, a paramedic who had come to Iowa City to visit her cousin.
She had really loved the town, and it was St. Patrick's Day, and that was one of her favorite holidays. And I think because it's a college town, sort of a great party atmosphere for St. Patrick's Day, she decided to go there and visit friends.
The second victim matched the description of a woman who had been reported missing. She was 27-year-old Maria Lehner, an environmental scientist who was in town on a business trip and was staying at a nearby hotel.
We was hoping and praying it wasn't her, but back of our minds, we kind of knew it was. They had found her blazer in a parking ramp, and it hadn't been driven for a while. So.
The apartment was rented to 3 college students who claimed they were out of town on the night of the fire. The men said they gave no one permission to stay there, and they also denied knowing either Laura Watson or Maria Lehner. At the morgue, the medical examiner found evidence that the women were dead before the fire started.
There was no soot in the lungs of either victim. Therefore, we were able to conclude scientifically that they expired prior to the fire.
It was evident they had both been killed by blunt force trauma to the head.
Inside the apartment, investigators found a barbell that contained blood and human hair, leading to speculation that this was the murder weapon. They also found a gasoline container.
You might find gasoline cans stored, of course, in garage or utility closets, but to find a gasoline can in a hallway of an apartment, I think that would be rather odd.
Investigators believed that the fire may have been intentionally set and that clues to the killer's identity could be waiting at the crime scene, hidden in the smoldering ashes. And they also wondered why these 2 women were in an apartment rented by men they'd never even met. The lack of soot and smoke in the victims' lungs revealed that the 2 women were killed before the fire started. And when the medical examiner compared the amount of tissue damage between the 2 victims, he discovered something astonishing. The 2 victims were killed on different days.
It is clear that Laura died in the late hours on Wednesday or the early morning hours on Thursday and remained in that apartment where she died, and that Maria died late Thursday night or early Friday morning in the same apartment.
Laura Watson's friends told police that they last saw her in a local bar on Wednesday night, 2 nights before the fire. Laura was talking to a man sitting beside her.
And someone that you've had a conversation with that's been kind of interesting asks you if you'd like to, you know, go to another party or go to another bar. Lots of people have done that, and it's a situation where most of us don't think that we're going to place ourselves in peril.
Witnesses said Laura left with the man around midnight. He was described as tall, in his 20s, with unkempt brown hair and glasses. Investigators discovered the same thing happened to Maria Lehner on the following night. The owner of a different bar said he saw Maria leaving his establishment with a man matching the same description.
She didn't have as good as judgment as she would have if she wasn't drinking. Maybe he said, hey, there's a party over at this place. You want to come with me? I don't think she ever did it before. I think this is one time, and it was the wrong time.
Since the victims had been murdered on 2 different nights, the killer apparently had free access to the apartment and could come and go as he pleased. But the college students who rented it said they had no idea who the killer was. After the last embers were out, the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations examined the scene for clues. Investigators noticed a hole in the outside wall of the apartment, and there was a gas container found just inside the front door. To see if an accelerant had been used, investigators placed some of the debris in an airtight container and sent it to the lab for analysis. Criminalists placed an activated charcoal strip into the can overnight, then washed it with the carbon disulfide. The vials were placed in a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer for analysis.
And it will separate it out based on the physical properties and chemical properties of the components of what ignitable liquid may be in that sample, and everything flows through the instrument at a different rate, and it'll actually separate out those, and you'll see the individual components of each component of the ignitable liquid.
The results were clear. Gasoline had been used to start the fire. Apparently, the gasoline vapors ignited, causing the explosion that blew through the outside wall. Investigators also discovered a matchbook in the debris.
The gasoline had to be ignited by something. And so when the fire marshal collected a matchbook in or around that fire scene that was really a fresh matchbook with only one match missing.
The fire had destroyed any prints that might have been on the matchbook. Steve Duffy looked through all of the photos taken at the fire scene, searching for items that may have been overlooked. In one of the photographs, he noticed something that looked like a pair of eyeglasses. When he returned to the apartment, they were still there.
They were very obviously prescription eyeglasses, and I hoped that I could go back through those prescriptions to find the owners.
None of the tenants or victims owned the glasses. Duffy also found a cigarette butt, still very much intact.
This cigarette had been smoked, had not been put out, had not been stomped out on the floor.
In other words, it was still burning when it hit the carpet. Investigators suspected that the perpetrator lit a cigarette, then started to pour the gasoline throughout the apartment. At some point, his cigarette probably ignited the gases.
He received a burn on his nose. He either swatted at his face and knocked his glasses off, or the glasses fell off his face. and the cigarette flew out of his mouth.
Now investigators were looking for a tall, unkempt man who smoked cigarettes and possibly had a burned face. He may also have been missing his eyeglasses. One week after a fire gutted their apartment, the 3 college students who rented it were allowed to return.
There were items stolen from the apartment that included a VCR or 2 and some other electronic equipment.
Investigators checked local pawn shops to see if someone had sold the stolen goods. And they got their first break. A pawn shop owner recalled buying these items from a young man just a few days earlier. In Iowa, anyone selling to a pawn shop must show some form of identification with an address. The man who sold the items was John Memmer, a 23-year-old drifter, known around town as a partier.
John Memmer was very adept at inviting himself to those after-hours parties. Because of that, he was a person who could con his way into staying over at any number of apartments and sleeping on their couch or what have you.
One of the apartment tenants said he knew Memmer and had let him sleep overnight a few weeks earlier.
He didn't have a lot of friends, he didn't have a job, he wasn't enrolled as a student, he was sleeping where he could. He was very transient, and yes, that made it more difficult to find him.
Mr. Memmer basically made his living by being a thief.
Police finally caught up with Memmer, who was on probation at the time for a forgery conviction. When he was questioned, investigators noticed he had a burn injury on his nose. Memmer admitted he had been in the apartment while the tenants were away and also confessed to stealing their stereo and television set, but he denied killing the women or setting the fire. He said there was another drifter sleeping in the apartment that week too. Police wanted to see if they could tie Memmer to the evidence.
Immediately after the fire and explosion, he did not have eyeglasses. And during the following week, he acquired another pair of glasses.
Using a machine called a lensometer, an optometrist determined the degree of curvature or diopters of the lenses. The strength of the lenses matched the prescription Memmer had been given by his eye doctor.
In John Memmer's situation, he needed his eyeglasses to see. He would not leave his eyeglasses laying around. So to find his eyeglasses at the scene of a double homicide and arson was significant.
Police needed more proof. They looked once again at the cigarette butt, the one investigators suspected had inadvertently ignited the fire. Was it possible this cigarette butt contained the killer's DNA? Scientists removed the wrapper from the lip end of the cigarette, then separated any cells present in the paper. The biological sample was then reproduced to create a larger sample for analysis, then compared to a DNA sample taken from Memmer while in custody. It was a match.
Statistically, the chances of the DNA in the cigarette butt coming from anyone but Mr. Memmer are too small to consider.
But Memmer admitted being in the apartment, which could account for him leaving his glasses and the cigarette butt. Police needed more proof. Investigators then examined Laura Dalton's leather jacket found in the apartment.
Somebody came up and said, you know, while we have this jacket, why don't you go ahead and look at the jacket? Maybe there's a print on a button, a snap or something.
Criminalist Bessman checked the jacket under a high-intensity light. No prints were found. Then he placed the jacket in a special cabinet with a small container of cyanoacrylate, a compound found in superglue. The compound was heated and the fumes circulated around the jacket for about 10 minutes.
The cyanoacrylate has made kind of a little fibrous network over those fumes, and we can look at it. It makes the ridges stand out white instead of the black like you'd see on an ink fingerprint card.
To his surprise, Bessman found a partial image of a foot impression. The print was dyed to fluoresce under forensic lighting. Bessman compared that print to the soles on the shoes confiscated from John Memmer when he was taken into custody. Both prints were the same size and make.
There had to have been a contaminant on the shoe or something on the coat that the shoe removed when it made contact with it. So it was rather unusual to develop a footwear impression this way.
And there was something else on the shoe. A tiny piece of evidence that would tell investigators exactly what happened to Laura Dalton and Maria Lehner. Investigators found one last piece of evidence linking John Memmer to the murders of Laura Watson Dalton and Maria Lehner. It was a tiny piece of material on Memmer's shoes.
On the side of the sole, about the size of a pinhead, kind of a reddish-brown stain that I believe might have been blood.
The stain was lifted using sterile water, then tested using DNA analysis. The DNA from the blood on the shoe matched the DNA sample from Maria Lehner.
It just made it just more sad because you kind of knew what he had to do to get blood on his shoes.
That was critical. It showed that John Memmer had been in contact with Maria Lehner, even though he denied it, and that at some point he was with Maria Lehner when she was bleeding.
John Memmer was charged with first-degree murder.
We had other forensic evidence, the jacket, the footwear analysis, the eyeglasses, but it was the DNA analysis that found Maria's blood on Memmer's shoe that was the final straw that let us go forward.
Prosecutors believe John Memmer broke into the apartment when he knew the tenants were out of town. How he lured Laura Dalton to the apartment on Wednesday evening isn't clear, but prosecutors believe Memmer may have made a sexual advance, which was rejected. In a rage, Memmer killed Laura with a blow to the head. On Thursday night, Memmer probably lured Maria Lehner to the apartment the same way, and when she too rejected him, he killed her as well. On Friday, after stealing the television and stereo, Memmer decided to destroy all possible evidence that he had been there. He lit a single match for a cigarette, then set about the process of pouring gasoline throughout the apartment. But he made a mistake. The gasoline caused fumes to build in the small apartment, and his cigarette caused the explosion. It knocked his glasses off, burned his nose, and the cigarette butt and matches went flying.
That was probably John Memmer's downfall, was his smoking the cigarette, because he left behind valuable evidence and nearly killed himself.
A waste. He's a waste of a human being. Soulless. I don't think probably ever contributed anything, and probably has spent all of his life using people and taking.
At the trial, it wasn't just the forensic evidence that made an impression on the jury. Memmer was sporting a new tattoo as he sat at the defense table.
In the gang world, a tattoo of a teardrop signifies you've murdered someone. In this case, that was significant because John Memmer did not want one teardrop at the corner of his eye, but he wanted two.
Talk about not very smart going to the trial with those on his eyes, and the jury can see it easily.
When I questioned him about that at trial, he claimed they were for two friends of his that had died in an automobile accident. But I think that was pretty powerful, damning evidence. In truth, in the aggregate, it was a small piece of circumstantial evidence, but it was an interesting addition to the totality of the case.
John Memmer was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Maria Lehner's family says it's ironic that science helped find her killer.
She was a biology major. She loved science. So knowing that the blood on the shoe and all the other forensic evidence was what put him away, I'm sure she would have thought that was pretty cool.
There is no such thing as a perfect crime. There's always evidence left. It's there for the people who look. This was where the evidence led, and it pointed to Mr. Memmer.
He received 2 life sentences. John Memmer will obviously serve one of his life sentences here on this earth. If I was John Memmer, I would be worrying about where I'm going to spend that second life sentence. It may be a lot hotter there than the fire that he started.
Did you see her? The color's back. She's dead. She's cut all the hell.
2 different men called police to report the same murder.
And what makes you think that she has been killed? Look at her. You just have to look at her.
Apparently, neither one knew that the other had called. The investigation uncovered even more unusual circumstances. But a few tiny seeds and a discarded candy wrapper were more than just insignificant clues. They told a story of revenge. Like many divorced people, Pamela Sweeney hoped she'd find someone to share her life with. Construction worker Larry Fleck was the man she set her sights on.
We were planning on getting married. We were talking about probably moving out of Minneapolis at one time. I don't know, we were just having a good time, the 2 of us.
She was a little kid full of life. And I don't know how to explain it. She was just made the house light up.
Pamela worked as a secretary for a computer company outside Minneapolis. The most important thing in her life was her 5-year-old son, Tony. On the Friday before Memorial Day in 1991, Pam told her parents she wasn't feeling well and asked if they could take care of her son overnight. She told them she was just going to take a bath and go to bed. But before she did, she spoke with her boyfriend.
She says, "What time are you getting off tonight?" I said, "Well, I got to work pretty late." I said, "It's going to be late." She says, "Well, I want you to come over." I said, "It's going to be really late." She says, "I want you to come over tonight."
Fleck says he arrived at Pam's house around 3 o'clock in the morning. When he looked into Pam's bedroom, he knew something was terribly wrong.
I seen a spot of blood up on the headboard. Oh my goodness. And in the bed, she was laying crossways, all wrapped up, rolled up in a blanket. I didn't want to do it, but I took the covers and I I rolled them back, and there she was laying.
Fleck ran to a neighbor's house to call police.
Okay, did you see her?
She's dead. She's cut all the hell.
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, Larry?
Less than 2 minutes later, as police were on their way, they got another telephone call. This one from one of Pam's co-workers, Patrick Walsh.
Is it the Sweeney residence?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the problem there, sir?
There's been somebody killed.
Okay, who?
Pam Sweeney.
Pam Sweeney?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had 2 males calling in stating that a female they had known, something terrible had happened to her and they needed the police.
When questioned, both men had unusual stories to tell. Larry Fleck said Pam invited him and that he ran from her house because he thought the killer was still inside. Patrick Walsh said he drove by Pam's house on his way home from a local bar. He said the lights were on and he wanted to check on her because she had been out sick that day at work. Police now had a dead woman and 2 men at the house at 3 o'clock in the morning. Investigators hoped forensic evidence would sort through what was to become a very complicated tale. When Pam Sweeney was found murdered in her own bed, police had to deal with a highly unusual situation. 2 men were at the scene. They didn't know each other, but both knew the victim.
Everybody's a suspect. And when they got out there, they had Patrick Walsh. He's a suspect. He's secured. He's handcuffed. They processed the scene. Larry Fleck was at the neighbor's house. Another officer went there to secure him.
Pam Sweeney had been shot 4 times, stabbed 4 times, and her clothing had been partially removed.
You go numb. You a thug, like your heart hits the bottom of your stomach and you don't know it's just like there's a humming going on in your head. You don't know what's going on around you.
Pam's parents were asked who they thought might have killed their daughter, and they had a ready answer.
I thought her ex-husband was the one that done it. He had 30-something weapons in the house. He tried to be a big gun collector, and he had some big guns. So first thing I thought was, well, since it's Pam, it's got to be Mike.
At Pam's home, there were no signs of forced entry. And there was another clue that Pam knew her killer.
We believe after he completed the final blow and she was dead and he saw the dead body, he, in an act of contrition, covered the body completely. It was completely covered. We think he did that so as not to see what he did, to cover it up, out of sight, out of mind.
The murder weapons could not be found in the house. But as the sun rose, investigators saw a path in the dew that had settled on the lawn. It led to a wooded area behind the house.
The officers got on their hands and knees and went through that backwoods inch by inch.
Back there was found a knife which had been stuck into the ground right to the handle, and a small revolver was found lodged under some loose boards that were laying behind the shed.
The knife matched a set of kitchen knives inside the house. The pistol was the same caliber as the one used in the crime. Both had been wiped clean of blood and fingerprints. In front of Pam's home, investigators found a clue first thought to be insignificant. In Patrick Walsh's truck, police found a candy wrapper. The same candy was found in Pam Sweeney's kitchen. But this brand of candy had a lot number on the wrapper. When police compared the lot number on the candy in Pam's house with the wrapper in Walsh's truck, it was a match.
So we drew an inference from that this guy, while he was there, was calm enough actually to take one of those bags of candy out of the drawer and eat it.
But this was inconsistent with Walsh's story. He said after he found Pam's body, he called police, then ran outside to his car to try to get help. If this were true, would he have stopped on his way out of the house to grab a piece of candy? Perhaps the most bizarre incident in the case was that Walsh's car was stuck in a ditch next to Pam's driveway. Walsh said he accidentally drove into the ditch when going for help. both Patrick Walsh and Pam's boyfriend Fleck had what appeared to be bloodstains on their trousers. And they both had plausible explanations. Both men said they were close to Pam's body when each discovered she was dead. But Walsh's clothing held a possible clue.
During the time that Patrick Walsh was being processed at the jail, they of course removed all of his clothing and his shoes and socks, and we, on the back of his shirt, located a leaf, and in his shoes we located a number of different types of vegetation.
Investigators wondered whether this vegetation was enough to identify a killer. While investigating the murder of 35-year-old Pamela Sweeney, police had 3 suspects: Pam's ex-husband, her boyfriend, and her co-worker. Police learned that Pam's ex-husband was with friends on the night of the murder and was eliminated as a suspect. Pam's boyfriend also denied any involvement.
They asked questions like how long I knew her, if I always come over there that time of night, you know, why so late in the evening I show up at this person's house, and basically asked me if I did, and I said no. You know, I'm in love with this person. Why would anybody want to do something like that to someone?
When Patrick Walsh's name came up as a suspect in Pam's murder, her family and friends said they weren't surprised.
He did harass her on the job. He harassed her on the telephone for 6 months. Night or day, she did call the police, but there was nothing they could do.
Her pastor, Thomas Braun, got a call from her a few months before the murder.
There was great amount of fear in her voice. She was beyond herself. She couldn't think straight. Emotionally, physically, she was a wreck.
Walsh was married and worked as a supervisor in the same company as Pam. She told friends that Walsh asked her out on numerous occasions and wouldn't take no for an answer. He also stopped by her home unannounced and performed various household chores without being asked in an attempt to win her affections.
He had been stalking her for months, obsessed with her physically, in his mind and his entire being.
She's never talked to me about it. She's never said somebody was taunting her, following her, or things like that. She's never said a word to me.
Pam did, however, go to the police, but they told her Walsh hadn't broken the law and there was nothing they could do.
A forensic taxonomist.
A taxonomist is an expert in living organisms. Dr. Anita Chalawa examined the various bits of leaves, grass, and other vegetation from Walsh's clothing.
There was lawn grass, there was crabgrass, and the oddball things, there were some seeds of quackgrass.
Quackgrass is a common weed, and it rarely produces seeds since people usually mow it before it gets to the flowering stage. This meant that the quackgrass seeds on Walsh's clothing were rare and unusual. Dr. Chalawa also discovered another species on Walsh's clothes, seeds from an aspen tree, which are called bracts.
Aspen is fairly common in Minnesota, but it's not the sort of thing that you'd see in someone's backyard.
The combination of an aspen seed and quackgrass told Dr. Chalawa that Patrick Walsh had been in a wooded area with high weeds. Dr. Chalawa didn't find any quackgrass or aspen bracts around Walsh's home. Dr. Chalawa discovered an area behind Pamela's shed that was untended and overgrown.
There was a lot of quackgrass in there. A number of other things too, but the quackgrass was, and it had clearly been flowering and fruiting in that woodlot.
She also found numerous aspen bracts. The area Dr. Chalawa identified was the exact spot where investigators found the murder weapons. She was convinced the specimens on Walsh's clothing were relatively fresh.
It wouldn't have attached itself to him for long periods of time, that it had to be something real recent in order to still be attached to his pants and stuck in his shoes.
But this was far from conclusive evidence. So police turned to a more traditional crime science. They analyzed the blood spatter at the crime scene. Walsh said he briefly shook Pam's body to see if she was alive before he ran from her room. But the blood on his clothing told a different story.
The staining was consistent with him coming in contact with a large amount of her blood on his pants leg, and stains consistent with spatter being found on him, which would indicate that he had been in close proximity when she was being stabbed.
And the size and shape of the spatter indicated the blood hit Walsh's pants from a blood-covered object that had been in motion. Investigators found similar blood spatter on the ceiling above the bed. These were perfectly circular, indicating the blood went straight up from the impact site.
The blood spatters give us a fairly good idea of where she may have been, and also the nature of the attack and how violent it was, how brutal it was, and how the knife was wielded.
I could look at the bloodstain patterns on the walls and determine the site where this impact took place. And this was right on the bed where she was found, and it indicated that that's exactly where she was attacked, on the bed.
She was stabbed in the bedroom, but shot elsewhere. There was a blood trail leading to the bedroom from the foyer, and bullets were found in the floor. This was where Pam Sweeney was shot.
We believe she was probably shot first in the lower levels of the house and dragged or carried upstairs, and then stabbed in her bedroom, and died most likely from the stab wounds, not the gunshot wounds.
A blood stain on Walsh's pants was consistent with carrying a bleeding person. The forensic evidence also explained why Patrick Walsh called police to report the murder.
Patrick Walsh, in a panic, attempting to leave the scene of this killing, got in his pickup truck, miscalculated the driveway, and drove into the ditch. It's now 3 o'clock in the morning. He just murdered a young woman, and his pickup truck is hopelessly stuck in a ditch. What do you do?
A week before her death, Pam Sweeney told her family she couldn't find a set of house keys and was considering changing her locks. On the day of her murder, the keys resurfaced.
In the front seat of Patrick Walsh's black pickup truck, lo and behold, was Pamela Sweeney's stolen keys. So there was a direct connection. He never really explained how it got there.
Police believe Walsh stole the keys while he and Pam were at work. Proof, they said, that he planned the attack.
About a week before the killing, he had called up an ex-girlfriend and wanted to get his .22 caliber handgun returned. He had loaned it to her earlier. He wanted it back. He claimed it was for an elk hunting trip he was going to make, but that was, we found out later, not planned for 8 months down the road. So we believe he was actively engaged in planning this well before the day of the killing.
Inside Walsh's home, police found a number of .22 caliber shells. Those were sent to the FBI laboratory for neutron activation analysis.
They were able to identify that the lead compositions in the lead fragments that we found in Miss Sweeney's skull matched the lead compositions that were in the shells found in Mr. Walsh's apartment.
A few years earlier, Walsh was allegedly involved in 8 assault cases with other women and was a suspect in a previous murder. Prosecutors believe when Pam Sweeney rejected Walsh's advances, he sought revenge.
Our belief was that that just infuriated him. I think he took the view in his sick, twisted, psychotic mind, how dare you reject me when I have been doing all of these overtly kind acts for you? How dare you?
The evidence suggests Walsh entered Pam's home around 11 p.m. while Pam was asleep. But she must have heard someone inside and made her way to the hallway, where she confronted Walsh. There was an argument.
What's obvious is that you need to go.
Life, we keep rejecting.
Walsh fired twice into the floor, possibly to scare her. The next 4 shots hit Pamela Sweeney. Walsh carried her to the bedroom, then stabbed her to death, causing the blood spatter on the ceiling and on his clothes, then covered the body, a telltale clue that the killer was someone Pam knew. The evidence suggests Walsh stayed long enough to have a can of soda and grab a piece of candy. And when he went to his car, he left the candy wrapper on the seat beside him. But he accidentally drove his car into a ravine on the side of the driveway and couldn't get it out. Walsh then went back inside the house in the basement to look for something to get his car free. Then, a surprise. Pam's boyfriend, Larry Fleck, arrived after work. When Fleck discovered the murder, he ran to a neighbor's home for help. Walsh had to act quickly. He tried again to move his car, but couldn't, so he had to remove the evidence. The botanical evidence on his pants proved Walsh ran into the high grass and woods behind Pam's home to dump the murder weapons. When he returned, and knowing police would find his car, Walsh had no choice but to call police himself to make it appear as if he, too, had driven by and found Pam dead.
It was clear to me that the suspect had been in that woodlot. I don't see how he could have acquired that material any other way based on what the investigating officers knew of where he had been at the time of the crime and the previous 24 hours.
I guess the irony of it is, in going to that location and picking up those soil samples and the seeds from the local trees, he did put himself right at the very spot where he was trying to hide evidence that he didn't want to be connected to. So I think that's fairly significant.
7 months after Pamela Sweeney's death, Patrick Walsh went to trial for first-degree murder. The sheer volume of forensic evidence against him was overwhelming.
It's amazing when you're prosecuting a first-degree murder case and you have 1,000 puzzles and you're convinced that you have the right person. It is amazing how those pieces of the puzzle start to fall together, fitting perfectly.
Patrick Walsh was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
Patrick Walsh is a psychopath and perhaps the most dangerous man I have ever seen.
I favor the death penalty, but then again, from what I hear, what's happening to him once in a while in prison, I think he's probably got a harder time right now being alive than being dead.
A wealthy American executive was found dead in his car in Mexico. It looked like an accident until a forensic anthropologist found evidence of a chilling tale of fraud and deceit. "34-year-old Madison Rutherford had everything. He was ambitious, successful, happily married, and rich. He worked as a financial advisor in Connecticut with an uncanny ability to make money for his clients. He also managed money for his friends, like Brigida Beck.
I thought, since I am alone in this country, I thought it might be wise, if anything would happen to me, I thought I should have him as my executor.
By all accounts, Madison Rutherford and his wife Rennie lived lavishly and had expensive tastes. So it wasn't unusual for Madison to travel outside the United States pursuing his various interests.
Madison Rutherford and his wife had a penchant for various types of animals, including dogs. And part of the reason for supposedly going to Mexico was to obtain another exotic dog.
But a few days later, Mexican police found Rutherford's car in a ravine near Monterrey. It appeared that the car had swerved off the road and caught fire.
When they got there, the car was burnt beyond recognition. Everything was gone. And he opened up the driver door and found some bone fragments on the driver's side.
Inside, investigators found a medic alert pendant and a wristwatch. On the back of the watch, barely legible, was the inscription, "To Madison, love, Rennie." Also inside the car, the charred remains of a human. All that was left were some bones and teeth.
The cause of death was listed as total carbonization, meaning that it was just disintegrated from the heat.
When Rutherford's wife, Rennie, got the news, she was devastated.
As I came into the house, everybody was very long faces and sad, and I said, my goodness, I said, what happened? And this one person tells me that there was something terrible happened last night. Madison had an automobile accident and he got killed. Huh. I thought this was just awful. You know, I thought, my goodness, how terrible.
Fortuitously, Rennie said she could help investigators with the identification of her husband.
She proceeds to tell the insurance carriers that she has one of Rutherford's teeth that was left over from some type of dental work.
The tooth was extremely helpful, since its hard enamel shell often protects its inner core in a fire. That core contains an individual's DNA. But one of the forensic scientists in Mexico was suspicious, particularly when he examined the items recovered from the car.
The clasp of the medical alert bracelet was found in the open position. He thought that very odd. If somebody had died and that bracelet was on them, it would have been in the clasp position.
Investigators wondered whether the open clasp was a clue or simply an unimportant detail. Although there were some inconsistencies in the accident scene, the Mexican authorities ruled that Madison Rutherford had burned to death in a car accident.
Mexico wasn't pursuing this. There was no complainant. They had a body and a tragic death, and they've closed their case.
As a financial planner, Madison Rutherford had planned for his family's future in the event of his death. He had purchased an ample amount of life insurance.
Rutherford had two separate policies with two separate companies.
He's doubly insured. He's insured for $7 million, $4 million from one company and $3 million from another company.
As a routine matter, insurance companies like to make sure that a person who dies in a fire is in fact their client. The tooth given to them by Rutherford's wife could be used for DNA comparison, but it wasn't enough. So they sent the charred remains from the accident to one of the most respected forensic anthropologists in the world, Dr. William Bass. The best bone evidence was a small skull fragment and 4 teeth. Dr. Bass found something highly unusual about the skull fragment. The top outside of the skull wasn't burned.
Now I got a lot of problems with it. If you're sitting in your car and it's on fire, the top of your skull is going to burn. It's going to burn up little pieces the size of a quarter. Now, here's a situation in which this doesn't happen.
Dr. Bass concluded there was only one way this could have happened. The victim's head had to be on the floor of the car at the time of the fire.
This tells me then that this is a stage scene, that this is not what happened in the normal crash of a car, that this is a body that has been placed in there in a position that it was not in before.
The skull fragment also provided clues about the victim's age. The human skull has 28 different plate-like bones. These bones come together in a process called fusion. Where they meet often looks like the stitching on clothes. As a person grows older, that stitching, or fusion, tends to disappear. In this case, it was almost non-existent.
It tells me that this is not a 34-year-old individual, that this is an individual maybe twice that, certainly 50 plus, because you don't normally get that much fusion in a 34-year-old white male.
The teeth also told a story. Sometimes different races have different shaped teeth. The ones recovered from the car had shovel-shaped incisors, not something associated with a white or Caucasian person.
These teeth had characteristics that are very specific to Mongoloid, this is Japanese, Chinese, or American Indian characteristics. These are what are called Mongoloid characteristics.
In addition, the teeth had large unfilled cavities, inconsistent with a wealthy man with access to the best in dental care. Dr. Bass informed the insurance companies of his findings.
I was told that the individual in this car was a 34-year-old white male. When I get through the analysis of the skeletal remains, that's not what I see. What is in that car is a 50 to 60-plus-year-old Mexican peasant who has, from a lower socioeconomic level, obviously being a peasant, but had done manual labor.
There were even more reasons to be skeptical, and more evidence that the scene might have been staged. Insurance investigators looked more closely at the medic alert pendant and the watch found in the ashes. If the body had burned almost to ashes, why did these items remain relatively intact? And witnesses said they saw a bicycle on the back of Rutherford's car earlier in the day, but no bicycle was found at the accident site. If it wasn't Madison Rutherford in the car, who was it? And where was Madison Rutherford? Forensic scientists were certain that Madison Rutherford was not the man killed in the car explosion in Mexico.
The focus switched not so much from we need more proof of death, we actually think he's alive. And now we want to find out where.
The authorities weren't the only ones concerned. His neighbor, Brigida Beck, had entrusted Madison Rutherford with her entire life savings, about $500,000, and she wanted to know where it was.
I was uncomfortable about the whole thing. I said, how is this going to play out? When do I get my money? When do I have a clear picture of this whole thing?
Brigida went to the Rutherfords' home and asked Rennie for answers.
She, said, I need to speak with you, and just don't make a sound. Please don't make a sound. Don't say anything. And I said, what's happening? So she leaned over kind of, and she whispered, he said, Madison is not dead. I said, what? And I said, what happened? Where is he? And she said, he's in hiding. I just lost it. I just thought this was just too much. I just walked away after a few moments, and I just cried. I just broke down. This was too much.
For Brigida, things soon got even stranger when Madison Rutherford showed up alive and well at her house.
This was all very bizarre. And how could he do that? And wouldn't he be afraid that he might get, picked up, but somebody might damage the house?
Rutherford told Brigida that his death had been staged for him by none other than the FBI. He said that organized crime members were after him because he had refused to launder drug money. He assured Brigida that her money was safe, but instructed her to tell no one he was alive.
He asked me, would you mind if I could spend a couple of weeks with you until I know what I need to do next? I said, of course. I mean, the poor guy had to be hiding from the mob. Why wouldn't I help somebody?
Without warning, Madison left Brigida's home, and she never heard from him again. A few weeks later, Brigida got another visit, this time from the FBI. Their investigation into Madison Rutherford's financial dealings revealed he had withdrawn Brigida's entire life savings. She was penniless.
The agent said there is no money, and I thought maybe they made a mistake. This cannot be. And I realized I had nothing left. He had dismantled everything little by little. And I said, my God, what do I have in my pocket? Excuse me. I had exactly $500 in my checking account. That's what I had.
Investigators had Rutherford's home under surveillance. Madison never appeared, but they finally got a break. A check of motor vehicles revealed that Madison owned a car that was being driven by a businessman in Massachusetts. His name was Thomas Bay Hamilton.
He works as a controller for a technology company. It's a fairly small company in downtown Boston.
As investigators were about to question Thomas Bay Hamilton, they got a call from Mexican authorities. They said they found a bag full of bloody clothes, and DNA tests concluded the blood was Madison Rutherford's. One year after Madison Rutherford's disappearance, Mexican police found a bag full of bloody clothing near the site of his car fire. The clothing showed numerous knife holes all over the chest area. DNA tests of that blood confirmed it belonged to Madison Rutherford. But this time, investigators didn't believe it. They were convinced the man they were following in Boston, Thomas Bay Hamilton, was in fact Madison Rutherford.
Stu Robinson, the agent who arrested him in Boston, has these fingerprints with him. When Thomas Hamilton is arrested and we roll his fingerprints, they're the same prints. This is our man. This is Madison Rutherford.
The FBI searched his apartment and found books on how to change your identity and travel brochures on Mexico. And they found one item that appeared to tie up the case once and for all.
In the Boston apartment, we find an actual to-do list. It says goals for the year 1999/2000. And the very top thing is collect $7 million from the insurance company. So that was a pretty good clue. We kind of tied them together with just that one piece of paper.
Right after he was arrested, Rutherford called his wife from prison.
This call may be recorded or monitored. The first thing is we have to keep you from getting picked up for anything they think you did, which you didn't. Okay? You got to go somewhere where they don't know the address. They'll be for you tomorrow morning. They'll get an arrest warrant by then.
What happens to everything?
I don't know. Let's do this piece by piece.
I'm shaking.
I know, but we got to get you out of here.
Rennie originally denied she had anything to do with the attempted fraud. But when investigators showed her evidence that her husband was dating other women while living in Boston, Rennie changed her mind.
She was not happy. She went through a range of emotions in a short period of time, and ending with anger.
With Rennie's help, prosecutors learned that they had been planning this crime for months. While Madison was in Mexico, he drove to a desolate graveyard in the Mexican countryside and removed a body.
Apparently, he'd found a cemetery in Mexico near to where the crash site was, went in to an above-ground tomb, took off the top of a casket, and took out the corpse out of the casket.
Prosecutors believe he positioned his car with the body inside at the bottom of the ravine, doused it with gasoline, and started the fire. When the flames subsided, he threw in his medic alert bracelet and watch so they would survive the blaze and help identify the corpse. He then took off on his bicycle. Rutherford returned to the United States and gave his wife the tooth he removed from the body so it could be used for possible DNA testing.
According to his wife, he walks in, I believe, with these things in a bag and says to her, "Here's my $7 million tooth."
To this day, no one knows whose bones were inside the car. Later, when Rutherford learned investigators were onto him, he was forced to change his plans. According to Rennie, her husband got into the bathtub fully clothed and cut himself to make it appear that he had been stabbed. Then he returned to Mexico to plant the evidence. Rutherford never realized that forensic anthropology would uncover the true position of the body in the car and that the bones would reveal the man's race and age.
Madison Rutherford thought of every detail, but he never thought of the bone doctor.
Investigators, looking for a motive, soon discovered that Rutherford had gambled heavily in stocks and lost.
He saw himself as a financial guru, and he tried to play the stock market as a day trader. He lost a considerable amount of money in the 1995-1996 period, and I think that he saw that faking his death and getting insurance proceeds was a way of recouping losses and providing himself with a nest egg for future investments.
Investigators learned that Rutherford used a number of aliases in the past. All were presidential-sounding names: Madison, Rutherford, and now Hamilton. His real name was John Sankey.
I thought it was ironic and quite humorous that he was arrested on Election Day on November 7th, 2000. So this man with all these presidential-sounding names didn't get a chance to vote for the next president. People think that the FBI doesn't have a sense of humor, but I think this proves that we do.
When faced with the evidence against him, Madison Rutherford pleaded guilty to fraud. Federal sentencing guidelines limit his sentence to 5 years. His wife, Rennie, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for her part in the attempted fraud. Since Rutherford had withdrawn $500,000 from Brigida Beck's accounts, she has nothing left. She confronted him during a telephone conversation while he was in prison.
Can I ask you one question? We never talked about my finances. What do you...
Let's talk next week.
Why next week?
Only because I can't do anything. Let's talk next week and go through stuff.
Because that's, I want to know a few things.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk next week.
We never really talked about it.
Okay. Let's talk next week.
He ruined my life. He ruined my security. He couldn't care less. My wonderful friend turned into a monster to me. And I hope that anybody that would find themselves in the same or similar situation, be careful who your so-called friends.
No criminal charges could be brought against Rutherford for embezzlement since Brigida had given him power of attorney. For investigators, Rutherford was clever, but clearly no match for forensic science.
This is one of the better cases that we have been able to solve from the use of science. And we're able to show that the actual events do not fit the story that we were told.
There's an old adage that goes something like, you're only as smart as you are educated. And clearly Madison Rutherford, as well educated as he might have been, was not educated in the area of forensics.
A homemade bomb ripped through a rural home. And investigators had no idea who was responsible. The device was made with common items found in any store. But a tiny battery number and the label inside a computer uncovered a bizarre tale of revenge. The tiny town of Fairhaven, Vermont, is about as far removed from big city life as any place in the country. Violence was virtually unheard of, but even so, locals used to joke that Sheila Rockwell and her 17-year-old son, Chris Marquis, lived in the safest place in town, about 100 feet away from the police station. But all of that changed one March afternoon in 1998.
There was a knock on the door. It was the UPS man. And he had handed me a package. And I looked at the package, and the package had said, Samantha Brown on it. Well, it didn't ring a bell to me because I don't know who any Samantha Brown was. So I brought it in to Chris.
Got a package here.
Chris was sitting at his desk in his bedroom, and he didn't know a Samantha Brown either. He opened the box. Inside was a smaller box wrapped with string. He cut the string, and there was an explosion.
And I did realize that I was hit because my fingers were gone. I tried crawling to Chris because he was moaning, and that's when I realized that my knee wasn't there and that I couldn't get to him.
Chief Ray Vigor heard the explosion and ran over to investigate.
Walked down this little corridor into the living room, and then we could see some stuff coming out of the hallway there, and young Chris was laying on right there in the hallway, half in the room, half out.
Both Sheila and Chris were rushed to the hospital.
A large piece of the shrapnel in this case went towards Christopher Marquis' leg and essentially blew a large hole in his thigh and severed his femoral artery, and he bled to death.
I kept asking, where is Chris? Where is Chris? How is Chris doing? And Dr. Hartman came in, and he put his hand on mine, and he said, Sheila, Chris didn't make it. And I can remember just letting out a scream, and then they had, put me under.
The shrapnel found at the bomb scene indicated it was a pipe bomb, the favorite device of amateur bombers. Tiny brass hex nuts had been wrapped around the bomb to make it even more deadly.
It's a terrible circumstance of violent crime that somebody just hooks up with the wrong person at the wrong time and becomes the victim of this kind of outrageous activity.
The return address on the package said, Samantha Brown, from Bucyrus, Ohio. When police checked the name and address, they found both were fictitious. Chris Marquis was a 17-year-old high school dropout, a loner. Because of an eye condition, he was slowly going blind. He spent most of his time indoors, and he had few friends. Yet someone clearly wanted to kill him. But who? As police looked into his background, they found Chris had a secret life, something his family knew nothing about. As police combed through the wreckage of Chris Marquis' bedroom, they had one question: who wanted him dead? The package was shipped from Ohio and was addressed to the CB Shack in care of Chris Marquis. It was a small business Chris ran out of his home, selling citizen band radios and parts through the internet.
Well, it wasn't really a business. It was mainly local people. You know, friends of his that he would fix their radio, or people would hear him on the radio, probably bragging and telling him how he could fix radios, you know. And it was pretty much locals.
But investigators soon discovered that Chris Marquis didn't always treat his customers fairly.
I think it's fair to say that Christopher Marquis was not completely honest in all of his business dealings with other people prior to his murder.
Chris Marquis made enemies by not living up to the agreements that he had made with individuals on purchasing and selling of CB sets and other various equipment.
Customers told police that Chris would promise to send one model of CB radio, but after he received payment, would ship another lower-priced radio.
Obviously, a number of these individuals were upset over this, and therefore it was necessary for the investigation to locate and interview these individuals in order to determine if that anger rose to the level where they would do such a violent crime.
With hundreds of customers, investigators now had hundreds of suspects. Investigators discovered that the package was shipped by the United Parcel Service from Mansfield, Ohio. The name and town on the return address were both fictitious. At the crime scene, investigators sifted through the debris looking for evidence.
An extensive search was required. We are meticulously going through every room where any piece of evidence that we're looking for, a wire, a tool, a hex nut. We are taking sweepings and going room to room.
Bomb experts say bombs are unique, that each bomber has a signature style. And the bomb that killed Chris Marquis had a signature all its own.
One of the things that we knew from the murder scene was that small brass hex nuts had been included in the bomb that killed Chris Marquis. So the FBI and ATF agents in the search were looking for hex nuts that might be physically consistent with the hex nuts in the bomb.
Investigators also found pieces of styrofoam used to pack the bomb, a piece of the battery used to detonate it, and they were able to identify the chemical makeup of the gunpowder used in the explosion. But all of these items were available in any hardware store or gun shop. The bombing death of Chris Marquis made the national news.
The witness realized that he had information that was important to law enforcement. It was at that point that the cooperating witness contacted law enforcement to relay his information that he had.
The informant told investigators that a long-distance truck driver in Indiana, Christopher Dean, had purchased a CB radio from someone through the internet and was angry about it.
This witness informed the FBI that he was present in a discussion with Mr. Dean when he spoke of his problems with the sale of a CB radio and a young man in Vermont.
There was information that he'd said he was going to come to Vermont and, you know, beat up Mr. Marquis.
When questioned, Dean confirmed he had purchased a CB radio from Chris Markey for $400 and had been sent a cheaper model instead.
Mr. Dean was very angered. At one time, his wife actually called Christopher Markey and indicated that her husband was quite upset and may be traveling to Vermont, and that he would not be very happy if he did.
There was a lot of phone calls, and a lot of times I would answer the phone and he'd ask for my son, and Chris would say, "I'm not here." You know, he'd give me the motion. He didn't want to answer the phone call.
Sheila admitted her son didn't return Dean's money, but Dean denied sending the bomb. He had no prior criminal record, and he lived in Indiana. The package had been shipped from Ohio.
He was described as a very hardworking person, reliable, honest, and a very loving family. He had plenty of friends and neighbors who trusted him, who thought he was a generous, regular guy.
Investigators wondered whether forensic evidence in Dean's home would contradict his story.
I can't really believe that somebody would do this. Chris was my pride and joy. He was my youngest child. They say that you have to forgive. And because of my religion, I believe I do have to forgive. But I don't think I've come to that yet.
Armed with a warrant, investigators searched Christopher Dean's home, their prime suspect in the bombing death of Chris Markey.
We are looking everywhere that any place a hex nut could be, a wooden clothespin, thumbtacks, batteries, any type of insulating materials, as well as taking sweepings from carpet, looking for powders, anything that may have held any type of explosive powders.
In Christopher Dean's basement, they found hex nuts similar to those used in the fatal bomb. To find out if they were the same, analysts used a process known as plasma atomic emission spectroscopy. They took samples from the hex nuts found with the bomb and those found in Dean's house. These samples were dissolved in a neutral chemical solution, which was then vaporized at extremely high temperatures. Different components like zinc and copper will vaporize at different speeds, all of which is monitored by a computer. Investigators concluded the hex nuts had the same chemical makeup.
Identical hex nuts from a metallurgical point of view were recovered from Mr. Dean's residence. They were stored in a container near his workbench, where we allege the bomb was constructed.
In the rest of the house was even more evidence. Investigators found the same type of wiring used in the bomb's detonator. They found the same type of pipe used in the fatal bomb. And the same type of styrofoam packing material was discovered in Dean's garage.
This pipe bomb used smokeless powder. One of the things we were looking for was powder like that. Now, interestingly enough, there was no container of powder found.
But in the kitchen, investigators found a small plastic funnel that looked like it might contain a clue.
That funnel, we could visibly see that there appeared to have been some type of powder used in that.
The powder was analyzed using a scanning electron microscope that uses X-rays to reveal its chemical components. That sample was compared to the powder found at the bomb scene. Both samples were smokeless gunpowder, and both had a 17% concentration of nitroglycerin in addition to the stabilizing component nitrocellulose.
The smokeless powder matched the smokeless powder from the murder bomb and from the smokeless powder we found inside his house.
But there was a problem. All of these items in Dean's home were available at stores in every state in the country. There was nothing unique or unusual about the gunpowder, the pipe, or the hex nuts. Investigators knew that sometimes the tiniest piece of evidence is the most telling, so they returned to the bomb scene. Among the thousands of pieces of debris, they found a mangled 9-volt battery. With a magnifying glass, investigators saw a series of numbers and letters on the side of the battery. 3G24, G205. A call to the manufacturer revealed this was a lot number that identified the day and the assembly line on which the battery was assembled. Inside Christopher Dean's home, investigators found an open pack of the same brand of 9-volt batteries, with one missing. The lot numbers on the unused batteries were the same as the one used to detonate the pipe bomb.
And that lot number meant that those batteries were manufactured at the same day on the same line.
Just when prosecutors thought their case against Dean would primarily be circumstantial, a computer forensic expert found even more evidence inside Chris Dean's computer. It was a file Dean thought he had deleted, but hadn't. Prosecutors found evidence that Christopher Dean ordered a CB radio from Chris Marquis and sent a check for $400. But Marquis sent a less expensive CB radio than the one Dean ordered.
The motive for Mr. Dean's actions in this murder of Christopher Marquis appears to be, unfortunately, his extreme anger over the fact that Christopher Marquis swindled him out of a $400 CB radio.
There was one last item in Chris Dean's home investigators needed to evaluate: his computer. A computer forensic analysis uncovered evidence that Dean had recently downloaded information on how to build a pipe bomb.
If an investigator were looking for evidence of searches for pipe bomb material on the internet, it is not difficult to locate, especially if the computer user himself is not savvy in how to cover his tracks.
And on the hard drive of his computer, there was a copy or template of the label used on the box that held the pipe bomb, with the same fictitious return address that was found on the pipe bomb package. Mr. Dean attempted to delete the file, but remnants of the file were still on the computer's hard drive.
He probably thought he covered his tracks and deleted all the files. However, because he printed it, the computer generated a second file on the system for the printer, and that is what was found.
It would be remarkable for anybody else to have made up the exact name and exact address that was contained on Christopher Dean's computer.
I characterized this computer label as a computer fingerprint. It was conclusive in my mind that somebody had, that this bomb was associated with that house. That somebody had created the address label used in this bomb at the Dean residence.
Christopher Dean was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors had plenty of evidence to prove Dean chose violence as a way to resolve his dispute with Chris Marquis. In making the bomb, Dean unwittingly used a 9-volt battery which identified the date and the factory in which it was manufactured, a battery which matched the ones found in his home. Logs from Mr. Dean's trucking company indicated he was in Mansfield, Ohio on the day the fatal package was sent.
We even went a step further than that. The witness at the UPS facility in Ohio identified Christopher Dean as the person who shipped that box.
We were able to compare the handwriting on the UPS receipt with Mr. Dean's handwriting, and handwriting experts would say that it was the same person.
And Dean had no idea he was dealing with a teenager.
They communicated over the internet and a little bit over the telephone, so they'd never met each other. Mr. Dean didn't know what Mr. Marquis looked like, didn't know he was a 17-year-old boy.
In February of 2000, Christopher Dean pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Sheila Rockwell, there was little satisfaction in the sentence. She still bears the scars of the bomb that killed her son. She limps from the shrapnel that tore through her leg, and her hands will never recover from the blast. But mostly, she mourns the loss of her 17-year-old son.
Why would anybody ever do this over CB radio? You know, if only I had known, I would try to, you know, reason with Dean. You know, pay him for the radio, send him back the radio, whatever the case may be. But it was just unbelievable that somebody that crazy would do something like that.
Sitting here today, I still can't fathom how one person would be of a mindset that just because they got ripped off for a couple $100, that they'd want to kill somebody that they'd never seen before.
For investigators, the case proved something that Christopher Dean never thought possible. He was convinced that since he'd never been to Vermont and he had never met Chris Marquis, that no one could tie him to the fatal bomb. But he never realized forensic science would identify him. The materials he used to build the bomb, the lot numbers on the batteries, and the fictitious name and address that was recovered from his computer left no doubt that he was the one who killed Chris Marquis.
Well, we had a lot of evidence in this case, but the forensic evidence, to me, was the linchpin of the prosecution. And we not only had one piece of forensic evidence, but we had many, many different kinds of forensic evidence.
It was just amazing the way that they had pinpointed the paper wrapper, the styrofoam, the bomb, everything that he had, you know, had put in the bomb, the hex nuts, were all right back to the manufacturer. It was unbelievable that science was that good.
No one in this quiet residential community saw or heard anything unusual on the day a neighbor was brutally attacked. But a store's security camera, a fingerprint, and forensic computer analysis helped to identify a suspect in another state within 12 hours of the crime. In 1997, Escaline DeBoard moved to a residential neighborhood in Knoxville, Tennessee. She lived just a few blocks away from her daughter and grandson.
So as soon as I became pregnant, she moved to Knoxville to be with me. She was very family-oriented. She liked being with her children.
The area was virtually crime-free.
If you were to match up the different sectors of this county, I think most everybody in Knox County would agree with you that it's one of the safest places in our county.
They're all families, lots of children in the neighborhood. Nice yards, the picket fence, you know, the quintessential American story. Very nice.
Escaline worked at home, using her computer to type medical transcriptions for the University of Kentucky. She spent the rest of her free time with her family.
My mother saw my child every day, and they talked on the phone numerous times. She would miss him. She'd have to walk the 2 blocks from her house to my house because she said, I need a grant fix. I've got to be with him.
Late in the afternoon, on August 20th, 2001, Liz realized she hadn't heard from her mother since talking to her that morning.
She always called me around 5:30. If she wasn't at my house, she would always at least call around 5, right before dinner, 5 or 5:30, and I hadn't heard from her. So around 6:30, I began to get concerned.
Calls to Escaline's home went unanswered and weren't picked up by her answering machine.
So I got in my car and drove to her house, and her door was locked and the blinds were closed. My mother loved lights, so this looks different. So I used my key to walk in, and that's when I found her on the floor.
Her mother had been murdered.
Was the door locked when you came in? Yes. Things are just all over the place. And her wallet is out of her purse, and there's credit cards strewn all over the floor. They've gone through things. The phone was unplugged down here. That's why her answering machine is pick up. And they've gone through cabinets, and her back window's closed. Mama. Mama. Oh, Mama. Oh, God.
The house had been ransacked, and it appeared as if someone had gone through Escaline's jewelry. The bruises and cuts on her hands and arms were defensive wounds indicating she had fought her attacker. Escaline's wallet was empty, and while some of her credit cards were found on the carpet, most of them were missing.
He took everything out of the wallet, took time to look at every little piece of paper in the wallet, and found the PIN code numbers for the credit cards.
Investigators found no signs of forced entry.
It told us it's a possibility that she knew the person, or that for some reason they surprised her at the front of the house and that the door was opened for whoever this was.
Well, we really didn't know. First impression would be someone that she knew because of no forced entry.
But Escaline's daughter didn't believe it.
She was so reserved, she was very quiet, and again, a very, very easygoing person. I could never imagine anybody knowing her, anybody she knew would want to hurt her.
In the kitchen, investigators found a soda can, a drinking glass, and a cigarette butt on the floor.
This perpetrator had spent a considerable amount of time in the residence, had taken time to eat some food and drink some cola, and just was in control.
Liz also told detectives her mother's car was missing.
We were able to relay to other agencies throughout the area to be on the lookout for her vehicle, because we only could assume that whoever had murdered Escaline DeBoard also had her vehicle.
Investigators canvassed the whole neighborhood, but no one had heard or seen anything unusual.
In a matter of probably 20 minutes of my arriving on the scene, I had somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65 people working on that crime.
Unfortunately, if it's not solved within a 24-hour after the fact, things can happen very quickly. Evidence can be destroyed. The case is getting cold very quickly.
In time, they would discover an important clue inside Escaline DeBoard's computer. There were no signs of forced entry at Escaline DeBoard's home, but her daughter Liz told police that her mother often left her front door unlocked.
trying to make it easier for me. If I had something in my hands or I was holding my son, I could just come in and not have to fiddle with keys, thinking about me.
There were plenty of clues in the townhouse.
We found latent prints on 2 glasses. The location of the prints on the glasses led us to believe, or did confirm, that someone had a hold of the top of the glasses carrying those in there.
The prints were entered into the automated fingerprint identification system known as AFIS and compared to millions of prints in a nationwide database. The search did not immediately produce a match.
Sometimes it takes a matter of hours, maybe even days, because you're looking at several million entries.
The biological samples from the rape test kit were sent to the forensics lab for testing. First, the sample was placed into a vial with a stain extraction buffer, which breaks down all non-biological particles and proteins surrounding the DNA. Phenochloroform was then added, allowing the DNA to congeal. And this was analyzed using a polymerase chain reaction test. The result was believed to be the killer's DNA profile. Next, forensic analysts examined Escaline's computer, and with the help of her employer's mainframe computer, found an important clue.
When we looked at Escaline DeBoer's computer, we discovered that she had sent out an email at 12:21, the day that she was found dead. That led us to believe that she was alive and obviously had been working on her computer prior to whoever had entered her home before she had contact with them.
And investigators found evidence that Escaline's computer had automatically logged off 3 minutes after sending that email. That meant the time of her death was sometime after 12:30.
We were trying to get a time frame for the death itself. We were also trying at the same time to learn if there was anything out of the normal in the community.
Neighbors told police there were magazine salesmen going door to door on the afternoon of Escaline's murder.
Many people relayed to us that these people had been in their residence or in their subdivision during the time of 11 in the morning up till almost 4 p.m.
Local ordinances require sales organizations to have permits for each and every salesman selling door to door, but there had been no permits granted to any sales groups that week. Sheriff Tim Hutchison knew that traveling sales groups from out of state usually stay at local motels. Typically, a company van would pick them up at the motel in the morning, take them to a neighborhood to sell door to door, and then take them back to the motel at the end of the day.
We've had problems in the past with some of these people being very pushy, trying to push themselves in on women and getting in arguments or fights. And so that set an alarm bell off the minute that the word came back to us at the scene that there were some magazine salesmen in the neighborhood that afternoon.
Detectives canvassed several local motels but turned up nothing. Back at the crime scene, investigators followed another lead. Escaline's wallet was empty, and her daughter told them it was normally full of credit cards. Detectives thought the intruder may have stolen them and tried to use them.
So we started looking through the drawers, trying to find past bills which would have those credit card numbers on them, which companies that they were with. And so by doing that, we found which cards were missing.
Police asked the bank to notify them if anyone tried using one of those stolen cards. They never dreamt that the killer would walk right into their trap. Only a few hours after Escaline DeBoard's murder, officials at her bank told police that someone tried to use one of her credit cards at an ATM at a local gas station.
We retrieved about, I think, $80 or so out of the ATM.
Detectives checked the ATM surveillance video. They saw a tall, thin man wearing a white shirt and black tie standing at the machine for 8 minutes. Afterwards, he picked up a drink and went to the counter to pay for it. It appeared that he was asking the store clerk for directions.
Whoever used Escaline DeBoard's card was dressed wearing the white shirt and black tie, led us to believe that it was one of the magazine salesmen who in fact had been in her residence. All the neighbors we spoke to said the magazine salesmen that came to the residence were wearing white shirts, black ties.
Detectives questioned the store clerk, and she clearly remembered the customer. He told her he was from New York City and asked for directions to the motel on Paper Mill Road. Police went immediately to the motel, and they spotted 2 vans similar to those used to transport the traveling salesman. Across the street, police also saw Escaline DeBoard's car, which was immediately processed for fingerprints.
When we spoke with the magazine salesmen that were at the Super 8, we discovered that one of the magazine salesmen didn't show up for their pickup point at 4 p.m.
That salesman was 21-year-old Roger Broadway.
When we first spoke with the manager of the magazine salesman, he was reluctant to give us information.
When the sheriff threatened to impound his vans, the supervisor changed his mind.
He started telling us that there was one individual that worked for him that was from New York City that had got word that his relatives were sick, and he immediately needed to leave to go back home.
The manager admitted that they recruited salesmen with criminal records, but claimed that they were rehabilitated.
The manager of the magazine salesman told us that many of the people that they hire are from halfway houses in inner cities, just to give them the opportunity to make some money and get out of the city.
Roger Broadway told his employer that he had a family emergency and needed to go back to New York City immediately.
The manager took Roger Broadway to the bus station, purchased him a bus ticket, and sent him on a bus back to New York.
Police knew they needed to catch Broadway before he got off that bus.
If he'd have made it back to New York, where it was from, it'd be really impossible to find him there.
He's on home turf then, and those people, if they know you're after them, they can hide out for long, sometimes long periods of time.
He would have went underground, I'm sure.
A background check revealed that Roger Broadway had served a prison term for aggravated robbery. Detectives checked with the bus company and were told the bus would take Interstate Highway 81 to New York. And they also told police exactly where the bus would be during its journey. Shortly after midnight, police asked sheriff's officers in Virginia to try to intercept that bus. Sheriff's deputies were able to catch up with the bus they believed was carrying Roger Broadway on Interstate 81 in Virginia. When they pulled the bus over and sheriffs walked on board, Roger Broadway surrendered without incident. In his luggage, investigators found bloody clothing, Escaline DeBoard's engagement ring, and her car key.
He held something in his pocket that my mother wore, and it was violating, I guess. The experience I had was a very violating experience, that he would even touch something that was hers, that touched her, I suppose.
Broadway's fingerprints were compared to those on the drinking glass at the crime scene and on Escaline's car window. A computer program identified small shapes within the fingerprints called minutiae, shown here in green squares. Hundreds of these points matched.
Those prints belonged to the suspect, Roger Broadway.
Investigators took a blood sample from Broadway for DNA testing. As expected, Broadway's DNA profile matched the biological samples at the crime scene.
The scientist told us that the odds of this being incorrect, the odds were greater than the population of the world.
Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe Broadway entered Escaline DeBoard's unlocked townhouse, intending to burglarize it, not knowing she was upstairs. Escaline was working upstairs on her computer, and she sent her last email at 12:21. The computer logged off 3 minutes later. Escaline must have heard someone downstairs and gone to investigate.
What you doing there? Go.
After a scuffle, Broadway killed Escaline, then cut the telephone cords. Before he left, Broadway helped himself to a soda and cigarettes. He took Escaline's credit cards and her car, then drove to the ATM for cash and directions. He never realized the store's security camera, normally used to prevent robbery, in this case, helped solve a murder. Broadway then ditched the car, told his supervisor he needed to leave town, and took the first bus to New York City.
I suspect a number of our more senior citizens that live alone would have been terrified that there was a madman on the loose. So we were very fortunate that we didn't have to live through that and try to calm the fears of a number of our citizens here.
When he saw the amount of forensic evidence, Roger Broadway pled guilty to murder and aggravated robbery. In return, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 50 years.
Roger Broadway showed no remorse for what he had done. And to me, I think he received the best penalty that was available to him. And I hope he has the rest of his life to think about that.
Liz Knopfsinger wears her mother's engagement ring to keep the memory of her always with her.
I love you. I miss you. That's about the only thing I could say to my mom right now. Or I wish you were here.
But she says she will not allow a killer to ruin what remains of her family.
I don't want my son to remember his grandmother that way, and I don't want to remember my mother that way. I want to remember her how she lived. I don't want to remember her how she died.
Officials in Tennessee have introduced legislation to regulate companies who use convicted felons as door-to-door salesmen.
No one here knew that this convicted violent felon was in our neighborhood selling and working. And so we would like to see a law on the books where the people must register with local law enforcement if they have a criminal record.
I would like to feel as though I had something to do with changing the industry and making it safer. So if someone does knock on your door, they are licensed and bonded and they have identification with their picture on it.
Even if those laws were to be passed, detectives warn people to be extremely careful when dealing with door-to-door salesmen.
You don't know their backgrounds, you don't know what they're capable of, you really don't know what their intentions are once they get into your home. So I would strongly advise not allowing people into your residence that you don't know.
You know, lock your doors. I don't care where you live, how safe it is. This is a safe community where murders never occur, but it did here.
Forensic computer analysis, DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, and the store's security camera all work together to solve a case within 12 hours of the crime.
The collection of that evidence, the way it was collected here, the way it was preserved, maintained, is a textbook example of how any investigation, and particularly a homicide investigation, should be run.
Thank goodness that we do, that we have the technology and the tools to be able to do that. So it's essential that the forensics, the science, is a part of the process.
A man was dead in a Michigan junkyard, and there were no clues or forensic evidence at the scene. But computer forensic experts found evidence of a crime that had everything: sex, lies, and a videotape. On November 8, 1999, Chuck Miller got a frantic call from his sister-in-law. His brother, Bruce, was missing. Bruce hadn't come home for dinner, and he wasn't answering his telephone at work. Chuck drove out to his brother's junkyard to look for him.
The door was shut. I opened the door and walked in and hollered his name. He wouldn't answer. And we walked around the corner of the desk, and he was laying on the floor.
Bruce Miller was dead of a gunshot wound to his chest. The telephone receiver was near his head. Bruce normally kept around $2,000 in his front shirt pocket to make change for his customers. That money was missing. The motive appeared to be robbery.
$2,000 cash in the pocket would look good to a lot of people in the area.
We just thought it was just a random, someone just walked in there and shot him because he always kept money in his front pocket and took that money.
It just appeared to be another robbery, another Dan Flint.
Criminalists from the Michigan Crime Lab used one-sided tape to collect possible evidence from Bruce's shirt.
The tape lift that I took from this particular victim only had his own head hair on it. There was nothing foreign that was determined on the tape lift.
And there were other signs that this crime scene was a little too clean.
We're talking about a business that hadn't been cleaned and probably since it opened. We're talking grease, oil, everything that leaves a good latent print, a good boot impression.
So he knew what to touch, what not to touch, and might have even taken other protective measures in order for him not to be found.
It was also troubling that Bruce was on the phone when killed. But to whom was he speaking?
No one's called and said, I was on the phone with Bruce Miller and I heard a gunshot. There's no latent prints that were, no bloody prints, no money fallen where they were in a hurry to get it out. Why the pocket wasn't ripped when they're taking the money out.
Bruce Miller was 48 years old. 6 months earlier, he married 28-year-old Cherie, and he was about to adopt her 3 children.
By all accounts, seemed to be a very hardworking, kind of mellow guy who, you know, took a chance with marrying Cherie Miller and her kids and taking on that load, as well as having 2 jobs, working at General Motors, as well as running a junkyard.
According to friends and family, it was a happy marriage.
She would talk to them in length about Bruce Miller, how he was the best thing that ever happened to her, how he was a good lover, how her kids endeared him. This was an older gentleman that caught the young woman, and he treated her like a princess.
Cherie had been at home all day with her children and several friends and wasn't considered a suspect. But she had a pretty good idea of who might be responsible. She told detectives that one of her former boyfriends, John Hutchinson, owed her husband several $1,000s.
Bruce had run-ins with John in the past, arguing over him stealing auto parts from the business late at night, and they argued just recently over a sale of a $20 tire to John Hutchinson's stepson.
Hutchinson claimed he was at home alone at the time of the murder. It was an alibi that couldn't be corroborated. It would take a second death before detectives would get to the truth. John Hutchinson emerged as the key suspect in junkyard owner Bruce Miller's murder. Hutchinson agreed to take a lie detector test. He collapsed during the examination.
John Hutchinson had some kind of episode where he ended up going to the hospital, but apparently he was pretty stressed out by this polygraph, which he did not pass.
But police needed more evidence than a polygraph. The autopsy revealed Bruce had been killed with a 20-gauge shotgun. In a search of Hutchinson's home, police didn't find a 20-gauge shotgun, bloody clothing, or the missing money.
The feeling was he had probably done it. We've exhausted all of our leads. This is our best prime suspect. What aren't we doing? What can we do differently to make it work so we can get the truth?
Weeks went by, then months. There had been no new leads in the case. But something unusual happened 700 miles away in Kansas City, Missouri. A former homicide investigator named Jerry Cassidy was found dead in his home, his gun still in his hand. There was a Bible in his lap, divorce papers were on his desk, and a report showing he had recently been treated for depression. In a trash can outside the home, police found a videotape marked for Jerry's eyes only. It appeared to be a home video of a woman dancing seductively.
Definitely a seductive tool, something you would send a guy that you're trying to seduce.
Friends told police they thought the woman on the tape was Jerry's girlfriend who lived in Flint, Michigan, and that her name was Cherie. When investigators called police in Flint, they knew just who they were talking about.
It was like getting hit upside the head with a sudden shock. It's like, you know, I can't believe it. She duped me.
Cherie Miller was brought into police headquarters for questioning.
She claimed that she did not even know Jerry Cassidy.
This is an audio recording of the actual interrogation.
Did you ever send naked pictures of yourself to Jerry?
No.
Did you ever send Jerry films of you naked?
No. Films of me naked? No, I didn't.
You never sent those to Jerry?
No, I did not.
When we showed her that we had this videotape of her for Jerry Cassidy, written right on the tape, for Jerry's eyes only, she went from not knowing Jerry Cassidy to turn around, I know him, but he's crazy.
Isn't it true that you were having a physical relationship with Jerry?
Maybe on mine.
No, I'm talking in person.
No.
In person?
No.
Cherie said she met Jerry Cassidy in a computer chat room.
Just messing around. I mean, I mess around online all the time just to figure out something new to do. I mean, everybody does it.
Computer forensic experts confiscated Cherie's computer as well as Jerry Cassidy's. And what they discovered inside answered some important questions, but raised many others.
This is one of the most bizarre cases I've handled in the 10 years I've been dealing with this subject matter. There was deception. There was a love triangle. Whenever there's an internet connectivity issue that relates to a murder case, of course it's going to be sexy.
Things were starting to get interesting. Police sent Cherie Miller's computer and the one used by her suspected lover, Jerry Cassidy, to an expert in the new field of computer forensics.
I get the stuff that's been deleted. I get the space that's unused by the computer. I get everything. And that's what I examine as a computer forensic specialist.
Sergeant Petrovka was able to mirror the hard drive which means he kept the hard drive in its original format, but makes a mirror image of it that we as investigators can use to download the information on there without ever tampering with the original best evidence.
Forensic computer specialists can also gain access to password-protected accounts on a hard drive. Passwords lock documents away from anyone except the owner. Investigators easily made their way into Jerry's and Cherie's private files.
I believe we had like 300-400 bookmarks, fragments that I had found that were relevant. There were probably thousands of hits on her name on just the Cherie 1013.
Investigators found incriminating evidence on Jerry's computer and in his private papers. It was an instant message conversation in which Jerry and Cherie discussed murder.
I'll call Bruce at 5 p.m. and tell him to call when he's leaving. Jerry, I'm scared. Is the gun loud? It's deer hunting season here.
Inside would be best, muffled.
Pull up to the left of the building, right to the door. He'll stay at the desk inside. Take his wallet. Take the whole thing.
There was discussion about pull the car up, I believe it was to the right side of the door of the office to the auto parts place, because then when you open up the driver's side door of the car, it would help hide a gun in your hand as you stepped out and went towards the front door of the business.
Police confronted Cherie with this computer message.
I'm telling you here, I have an email that lays it out right here in front of me about how you and Jerry Cassidy planned his murder.
That's right.
Okay, why would Jerry even think about changing that?
I don't know.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
I don't have a clue. Maybe because he was mad because I wouldn't have nothing to do with him.
Cherie said the instant messages were forged. Officials at AOL confirmed that this was a possibility.
We first informed the prosecutors and investigators that this is an instant message that may not be authentic. It possibly could have been edited, but I couldn't say, in fact, it was authentic and did come through the American Online Service in its exact form.
It was very important for us to forensically back up this instant message and show that there was a relationship and show how she got Jerry Cassidy to kill her husband.
Under court order, AOL released information regarding Cassidy's and Cherie's computer activity. AOL verified that Jerry and Cherie were both signed onto the AOL service on the same day, at the same time, and for the same length of time as the instant message indicated. Cherie also took steps to cover her tracks.
A day and a half after the killing of her husband, she calls America Online to change her first and last name, to change her street address, city, state, and zip code. After she learned of the suicide of Jerry Cassidy, she did the same thing.
And Jerry's home computer showed hundreds of emails from the screen name Cherie 1013 that had been deleted.
The data is still there until such time as the computer needs to write something new, and the computer says, oh, that spot's open, I'll write it there now. And so the data resides on the hard drive until it's overwritten.
Among a stack of papers on Cherie's computer desk, investigators found the name John O'Connor, which was misspelled, and a telephone number in Cherie's handwriting. In the instant message which Cherie claimed was a fabrication, Jerry wrote, "If anything happens to me, call him, John O'Connor," with the same misspelling and his telephone number, which was also incorrect.
Certainly corroborates the fact that they had been communicating in that instant message.
It was 1 in 2 quintillion chances that that alone could have happened by coincidence. That's 19 zeros after the 2.
The forensic computer analysis also revealed the motive for the murder. In a moment, how Cherie Miller managed to fool a seasoned homicide investigator. Forensic computer experts found proof that Cherie Miller and Jerry Cassidy conspired to kill Cherie's husband, Bruce.
It was like reading a diary of the relationship. It showed her saying things to this guy to really kind of bring his blood to both a sexual and emotional boil, to really bring him into her and her world as she was showing it to him.
Only a month after Cherie's marriage to Bruce Miller, she met Jerry Cassidy in an America Online chat room. The two struck up a friendship. Jerry was going through a divorce. Cherie said she was unhappy, too. Eventually, they met face to face and became lovers. When the two were apart, Cherie kept the spark in their relationship by sending Jerry erotic pictures of herself through email. She also recorded the videotape, later found by investigators in Jerry's trash. At one point, Cherie told Jerry she was pregnant with twins and that Jerry was the father, although she had had her tubes tied years earlier. Cherie emailed a picture of a positive pregnancy test she had taken from a friend and sonograms of a fetus which were actually taken 5 years earlier of her son. Cherie claimed her husband Bruce was a member of organized crime, a drug dealer, and was physically abusive towards her. There was no evidence that any of this was true. She claimed Bruce had beaten her so badly that she miscarried Jerry's unborn twins. Cherie emailed Jerry pictures of her bruised and battered body, a feat she accomplished with makeup.
This was a situation where a woman very plottingly and purposefully created an artificial universe to cause this guy to believe that he would be doing the quote-unquote right thing to come and murder Bruce Miller.
He couldn't see what the truth was anymore and what was a lie. He was going to be the white knight for Cherie Miller. He was going to kill the dragon and claim his property.
In an instant message, Jerry and Cherie made plans for the murder. Cherie said she would keep her husband on the phone while Jerry went in to kill him. Telephone records confirmed this is precisely what happened. Jerry's experience as a homicide detective meant he could commit the crime while leaving no forensic evidence behind. Just a few weeks after Bruce's murder, Cherie double-crossed Jerry. She stopped answering his calls and emails, and she found another boyfriend.
I think he was grief-stricken. What have I done? What has she led me to do? And for what? She didn't give a darn about me.
Among Jerry's personal papers was a suicide note addressed to his parents. It was painfully obvious Jerry still believed most of Cherie's lies.
He beat the crap out of her and killed my baby. I'm sorry, Mom. These were my babies. I loved them. I wanted them. I drove there and killed him.
But Jerry finally realized he had been used.
I was so blind and so stupid and so much in love. Little did I know she never meant any of it. She just wanted all her money and no more husband. Cherie was involved and helped set it up. I have all the proof. She'll get what's coming.
There was no doubt, Jerry said he did it. Jerry did it. There was no making it up. Jerry wasn't that type of individual that he'd pull somebody's leg like that, especially in a situation like this. He wasn't going to shoot himself and then leave this for somebody if it wasn't true.
In December 2000, Cherie went on trial for murder and conspiracy. The forensic computer analysis was the state's primary evidence.
Did you kill your husband, Bruce Miller?
No, I did not.
Did you help anybody kill your husband?
No, I did not.
Did you love your husband?
Yes, I did.
Cherie continued to maintain the instant messages were a forgery. She claimed Jerry was the spurned lover and did this in an attempt to frame her.
So are you saying this entire instant message is fake?
Yes, I am.
So when they talk about the discs and the pictures on your back and legs and whatnot, the bruises, you never had that conversation?
No, I did not.
But the forensic computer analysis proved otherwise and provided a possible motive for the murder. Money from Bruce's life insurance policies and the sale of his junkyard business.
I told my wife that I think Cherie's grinning from ear to ear, thinking the money she's going to get from this right here. And that was my thought the night he got killed. Because she was that kind of person, just a money-hungry person.
Right after the homicide, she redid the house. She spent a lot of money. Even Bruce's mother bought her a car with some of the money that was left to her. So money may have been a motive, we don't know.
Prosecutors do not believe John Hutchinson had anything to do with Bruce Miller's murder. In December of 2000, Cherie Miller was found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
She had no respect for the man she married. She had no respect for my brother. She had no respect for her own kids. Put them through this. She got what she deserved.
I've seen gunshot wounds. I've seen knife wounds. I've seen dismemberment. I've seen axe murders. I've seen people who've drugged people by cars, killed by autos, but I've never seen anyone killed by a computer.
For investigators, the verdict was a triumph of high-tech detective work and old-fashioned gumshoe investigation.
If we had been unable to find hard evidence to back up the printouts, the emails, the instant messages, we would not have had a case.
By doing the computer forensics, we showed that manipulation of Jerry Cassidy and what brought him to killing Bruce Miller and then taking his own life.
She thought she had beaten the system. She thought she planned the perfect murder. She thought that those things that she typed in would never, ever come back to haunt her. But she was wrong.
It was a drive-by shooting that left one man dead and another seriously wounded. A witness said the perpetrator was driving a red Jeep. There were thousands of vehicles just like it, but it was nothing more than a handful of dirt that made one stand out from all the others. Front Royal, Virginia is an area steeped in Civil War history, and the nearby Shenandoah River makes this a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts from hundreds of miles away.
Very laid-back community. It's mainly mountainous, rural. Hunting and fishing is the main things to do in our area.
On the night of September 26, 2002, there was a terrible rainstorm. A motorist driving by the low-water bridge saw two men on the ground bleeding next to a truck. He immediately called police. Both men had suffered serious gunshot wounds. The man on the driver's side of the truck, 20-year-old Joe Kowaleski, was still alive, but just barely.
He's in dire straits, barely clinging to life. I mean, he was really injured bad.
The other victim, 23-year-old Ty Lathan, was dead. Lathan was no stranger to law enforcement.
Always been in trouble. I've actually charged him with robbery before and flew to Atlanta and picked him up.
Even if he had gotten in trouble, it doesn't make him bad. To me, it doesn't. Everybody makes mistakes in life. But Ty was a very loving person, and it's so sad that a young life has been taken.
Police found 2 empty 12-gauge shotgun shells on the ground nearby, along with 3 cellular telephones.
Everybody has a cell phone, but very few people have multiple cell phones. So therefore, there's possible drug involvement in the aspect of this crime.
Investigators found drug paraphernalia in the victim's car, and there were circular tire tracks nearby, a possible indication the men had been ambushed.
Since it was a cold, rainy, dark night, we didn't think someone was just down there enjoying the beauty of the river and the woods in that area.
The inclement weather made gathering evidence almost impossible.
We had nothing. We had nothing but a truck, raining, blood all over the place, and a couple shotgun shell casings, and 1 dead body. You know, so it was a reality check real quick.
Joe Kovaleski was in a coma for several days. When he finally regained consciousness, he said very little about the incident except that the shooter was driving a red Jeep.
I saw it come around to the right side of my truck and fishtail stop. I heard 2 loud bangs, sound like explosions.
He thought it was the police. He thought it was a flashbang, a distraction device.
I remember falling to the ground and just immediate numbness and paralyzing feeling and couldn't breathe.
Investigators hoped that forensic evidence could help find the driver of the mysterious red Jeep. Investigators found 2 shotgun shells at the scene of a double shooting that wounded Joe Kovaleski and killed his co-worker, Ty Lathan. Jay Mason, a firearms expert with the Virginia Division of Forensic Science, examined the evidence.
I was asked to make any determination I could as to the number of shots that were fired and the direction and angle in which they were fired from.
From the evidence, Mason concluded that at least 4 shots were fired during the attack. Mason also wanted to determine how far away the shooter was from his victims. So he fired the same type of shotgun shells at varying distances to analyze the dispersion of the pellets, then compared them to the shotgun holes in the victim's truck.
There is a rule of thumb that we can use, which states that we expect to find an inch diameter pattern for every 3 feet or yard of distance after the first yard.
There was a 2-inch wide pellet pattern on the passenger door of the truck, indicating the killer was between 6 and 9 feet away. The trajectory revealed the gun was pointed upwards.
This would be consistent with someone firing from a vehicle pulled up alongside the victim's vehicle and firing from the window of the vehicle.
The ballistic evidence suggested that the skid marks near the victim's truck were most likely those of the killer. But analyzing tire impressions was impossible because the parking area was mostly gravel. Police also recovered 3 cell phones at the scene of the murder. One was Joe Kovaleski's, the other belonged to the dead victim, Ty Lathan.
Assumption on our part was that the one that was found on the ground on the passenger side possibly could have been the suspect's cell phone, maybe dropped by accident.
Cell phone records revealed that the 3rd phone belonged to Julie Grubbs, who was a friend of both victims. She lived in Annandale, Virginia, about an hour's drive away.
I knew that she was heavily into drugs. I had heard that she was into different ways of obtaining money, different things. So my opinion of her was not high at all.
And investigators found something else. A second cell phone registered to Julie Grubbs was used to call Ty Lathan 22 times in the hours leading up to the shooting.
It doesn't strike you as odd as the phone calls being made to somebody in Annandale. What strikes you as odd is the sheer amount of the phone calls and the time allotment leading up to the murder.
The last call was just minutes before the murder.
When all of a sudden his calls stop at 7:56 p.m., then there's obviously some incident that happened at 7:56 p.m. that he did not make any more phone calls.
Investigators were about to interview Julie Grubbs when they developed another lead. Ty Lathan had told friends that he was involved in drug trafficking with a sheriff's deputy, Kevin Kinsey, who was a supervisor at the work release center where Lathan was living.
He told me the cop was letting him deal drugs from the work release. Excuse my language, but they'd have prostitutes come up in there, all kinds of stuff.
We're dealing with like 2 investigations at the same time because Kevin Kinsey did know Tyree Lathan. And then now you have the possibility or the theory, was Kevin Kinsey involved in the shooting himself?
With the allegation that a sheriff's deputy might somehow be involved, the FBI was brought in to assist the investigation. Although Joe Kowaleski survived the shooting that killed his friend Ty Lathan, Kowaleski wasn't immediately forthcoming in his interviews with police. Kowaleski was also suspicious of law enforcement since he knew Ty Lathan was involved in drug trafficking with a sheriff's deputy.
The killer was still out there on the loose. I was defenseless in the hospital. I couldn't get away. So anybody that walked through that door with a gun, because it easily could have finished me off. So yes, I was very scared, nervous, frightened, defenseless.
Kowaleski said he went with Ty to the low-water bridge to buy drugs. Then, a red Jeep approached, and someone inside opened fire. But he never saw the shooter's face. But the sheriff's deputy, Kevin Kinsey, didn't own a red Jeep. Kinsey had been implicated in dealing in illegal drugs with the dead victim, Ty Lathan. Their other suspect, Julie Grubbs, didn't own a red Jeep either. But when police visited Julie Grubbs' apartment, they noticed a red Jeep in the parking lot. A check of motor vehicles revealed the Jeep belonged to Julie's boyfriend, Louis Feltz. Feltz was allegedly involved in dealing in illegal drugs, and both knew Ty Lathan and Joe Kowaleski.
The times that I'd seen him, strung out, 5-day binges of smoking meth and crack, and just sitting there curled up in a ball, shaking, talking about how much life hurts, literally talking about how much of a rush it would be to kill somebody.
During the surveillance of Felt's red Jeep, investigators saw Feltz walk towards his vehicle with some cleaning materials.
If he had been given that opportunity, he could have washed away any blood or DNA evidence that had been transferred from the homicide scene to the Jeep, and it doesn't take much to wash them things away. So ultimately, we had to act. It was that important that we could not let him clean that Jeep.
After confiscating the Jeep, investigators searched Julie Grubbs' apartment and found the cell phone used to call Ty Lathan on the night of the shooting. They also found $1,200 in cash, marijuana, PCP, and crystal methamphetamine. But they didn't find the shotgun used in the shooting.
The shotgun would have been the coup de grace, but we didn't have it.
Feltz and Grubbs both denied any involvement in the murder. They claimed they were both in Grubbs' apartment in Annandale, more than 60 miles away from the crime scene. But investigators noticed something unusual on Felt's Jeep. A lot of dried mud in the wheel wells.
Here you have a Jeep that supposedly is in Annandale. You don't have river dirt. You don't have so much dirt per se as you would asphalt or concrete.
To see if this dirt could link it to the murder scene, investigators contacted forensic geologist Dr. Eric Junger.
One of the most important things that we do within forensic science is try to solve what we call a forensic triad. And this is where we link the victim, suspect, and crime scene together. That triangle, if we can make that work, is crucial to most of our investigations.
Dr. Junger says that mineral ratios, erosion, and other environmental factors can often distinguish one soil sample from another.
That makes everything unique. So that basically the idea that the soil is dirt no matter where you go, and it doesn't change for miles around. Dirt is different 30 feet apart from each other.
First, soil samples were carefully collected from the Jeep's wheel wells. Then they were put through a series of mesh sieves to separate the coarse materials from the fine. Under a microscope, Dr. Junger saw a lot of common material like clay and vegetation, but he also found something else, a sparkling blue fragment he identified as azurite, and an emerald green malachite fragment. Both were copper-based minerals.
They're not very strong, and typically you can take these particles in your fingers and just grind them, and they'll fall apart without much trouble at all. It told me that there had to be a source for these minerals nearby, because these are not going to be transported 20 or 30 miles downstream.
The murder took place at Low Water Bridge, just a few feet away from the Shenandoah River. Investigators discovered that just 1 mile upstream was a working quarry.
We've all seen people who've worn copper bracelets for long periods of time and then it turns their skin green underneath. The same effect is happening. This is what's happening in the water there. And once I'd seen that, I knew we had found the source of the malachite and the azurite.
Soil samples were collected from the murder scene in the area where police noticed the circular tire tracks next to Low Water Bridge.
If we think the suspect came in one direction, left in a different way, we take samples all along those tracks, because again, those soils will change.
The samples from the parking area were analyzed in the same way as the soil samples from Lewis Felt's Jeep. In both samples were the same mineral components of azurite and malachite.
Mr. Felt's vehicle was at that crime scene when the murder took place.
No question, ifs, ands, buts about it. Not 100 yards up the road, not 100 yards down the road, whatever. It puts his vehicle right there.
Dr. Junger believes that the minerals from the quarry got into the Shenandoah River, traveled a mile downstream, and were washed ashore into the parking lot at Low Water Bridge around the time of the murder.
He's the man. You know, he's the know-all, tell-all god of this forensic geology.
Now investigators had to prove who was in the Jeep on the night of the murder.
We are in the position of being able to convict the vehicle of the homicide, but we were much weaker on proving who actually pulled the trigger.
Julie Grubbs and her boyfriend Lewis Felts emerged as the prime suspects in the double shooting at Low Water Bridge. Witnesses placed Julie Grubbs at her apartment around the time of the murder, but someone using her cell phone called Ty Lathan 22 times in the hours leading up to the murder.
Every time you push that send button, you're hitting a tower, and that information's being logged in and kept.
A check of cell tower records showed that Julie Grubbs' cell phone used many different cell towers during those calls.
The cell phone started making phone calls at 3:33 p.m. on the 26th, the day of the murder, and they were using Washington, D.C. cell site towers. Around between the 6 to 7 o'clock hour, they roll over into Fredericksburg towers and then ultimately into Winchester towers, which is straight down from Fairfax. So we're actually able to show that that cell phone traveled west on 50 and ended up in the Shenandoah Valley that night and was used.
And investigators discovered that several local residents saw Lewis Felts in a nearby convenience store earlier that day. In addition, Ty Lathan's stepmother was with Ty about 2 hours before the murder when he received a cell phone call.
And he said, "Louis, damn it, I told you I'll meet you at Deer Lake," and slammed the phone down.
Phelps consistently denied being in Warren County for a number of years prior to the murder. So it was vital to our case to be able to put him here in Warren County and put him near the crime scene. And we were able to do that through the cell phone records.
And investigators discovered even more forensic evidence. Mike Kennedy, a friend of Louis Phelps, came forward with a startling revelation that he had sold Phelps a shotgun 3 weeks before the murder. Kennedy also said he had several spent shells from that shotgun still in his possession.
They might never believe me or whatever, but I told them that I fired the gun. They wanted to know where.
Investigators recovered 9 shell casings in Kennedy's yard. When a shotgun fires, the firing pin leaves a distinctive mark on the shell.
I like to refer to it as a fingerprint of the firearm, this impression on the back of the shot shell case.
Firearms expert Jay Mason compared the shell casings from Michael Kennedy to the shells found at the crime scene. He saw double horizontal lines with a slash on all of the samples.
The fact that I was able to identify the shot shell cases all having been fired from the same firearm put the murder weapon in the hands of the suspect.
Kennedy wasn't surprised by the match.
The day after Ty was murdered, I knew in my head Louis Phelps had something to do with it.
Prosecutors believe the motive for the shooting may have been old-fashioned jealousy.
The classic love triangle. There was some evidence that there was jealousy that had developed by Phelps. He was suspicious that Ty had been with his girlfriend.
The forensic evidence shows that Louis Phelps called Ty Lathan while driving towards Front Royal and asked him to meet at Low Water Bridge. There, he saw Ty Lathan and Joe Kowaleski parked and waiting. Phelps fired into the truck, killing Ty Lathan and wounding Kowaleski. The trajectory analysis shows that Phelps fired from his Jeep. 2 shell casings fell to the ground. As Phelps drove away, the minerals malachite and azurite lodged in his wheel wells, giving investigators a precise geological record of his location. When Phelps saw the amount of forensic evidence against him, he accepted a plea bargain and pled guilty to 1 count of capital murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Phelps was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I think our case showed that Louis Phelps is a heartless killer and deserved every minute behind bars that he received.
Prosecutors say there is no evidence to suggest that Julie Grubbs was involved in the shooting. Joe Kowaleski is blind in his right eye and has limited use of his right arm. Kevin Kinsey, the sheriff's deputy implicated in drug dealing, was later convicted of distribution of crack cocaine and sentenced to 40 months in prison. There was no evidence he was involved in Lathan's murder.
Let me tell you something. I'll be the first man if Kinsey had anything to do with the death of Tyree Lathan. He'd be in jail for it right this second. I can guarantee you that.
The science and technology really came into play in this case in a tremendous way. We couldn't have completed this prosecution without it.
Your witnesses will change their story. Your victims will change the story. There's just too many other things that can change, but your physical evidence never changes, period. It never changes. And to me, that's one of the key things. Physical evidence tells it like it is, period.
I've watched this show called Forensic Files, and I've seen it a lot, and I knew that they could do it.
A teenage girl in Australia was found dead on the side of a road. Her boyfriend became the prime suspect. Eventually, he confessed to her murder, but so did another man. Who was telling the truth? It took 40 years, a writer and a pedestrian crash reconstructionist to finally uncover the truth. The city of Perth sits on the western coast of the vast continent of Australia. It's a modern example of the industrious but laid-back Aussie lifestyle, where beaches, barbecuing, and sport are critically important. In 1963, the city was smaller, but not that different.
Perth had been a sleepy little hollow, just a beautiful little town where you'd never thought of any sort of crime or murder. Very innocent, very secure.
At that time, John Button was a teenager in love with 17-year-old Rosemary Anderson.
Very quiet, a bit headstrong at times, but very enjoyable company-wise.
On John's 19th birthday, Rosemary stopped over at John's house to celebrate. John's little brother was also there. The three teens spent the night watching television.
While they were eating the fish and chips, John, watching TV, saw a hand come across for his piece of fish, yelled at the person thinking it was his little brother, but it was Rosemary. She got upset. She stormed off and said that was over. She was walking home.
Button said he got into his car and drove alongside her, apologizing and trying to convince her to get into the car so he could drive her home.
She'd done that once before, and after he stopped for a little while, and after a 5-minute walk on her own, she cooled down. He thought she would do that again.
So he watched as Rosemary walked under a railway overpass and around the corner.
I sat there, I smoked a cigarette, and just in those 2 or 3 minutes, she was out of sight.
John claimed he drove after Rosemary and found her face down on the side of the road, unconscious, bruised, and bleeding.
So without thinking, I just put her straight in the car and rushed her straight off to her family doctor.
Dr. Alistair Turner treated Rosemary that night.
She had severe injuries where she was scraped down the road to her face and to her limbs, and her blood pressure was very unstable, going up and down as she was losing blood into abdominal organs and so on. So really I don't think she ever had any chance of survival.
When the police arrived, they noticed a dent on the front of John's car. And they also noticed fresh blood. John was interrogated for several hours.
There was the accusations. Why did you knock her down? We know it was you that knocked her down. Of course it was you. Look at the front of the car, it's damaged. You had an argument, it must have been you.
Eventually, Button confessed to hitting his girlfriend with his car. In his written confession, he admitted the couple's argument was over something more than a piece of fish.
They wrote down that I tried to get fish with Rosemary. I tried to come on to her, and she refused my advances, and that's what caused the argument.
When Rosemary refused to get in the car, Button said he got angry and tried to scare her, so he sped towards her, intending to stop, but lost control of the car and inadvertently hit her. Prosecutors had all they needed for a conviction. Just a few hours after he confessed to killing his girlfriend with his car, John Button recanted. He now said his confession was coerced and that police hit him during the interrogation.
And I think it was after about 4 hours of questioning that I received a quick punch to the stomach, which put me underneath the table. They pulled me out and sat me back in the chair again, and I realised at that point that they weren't going to let me out of here until they got a confession. And the way they were going was just going to get more and more physical.
Button said the body damage on his car happened a few weeks earlier, and that Rosemary's blood dripped onto the front bumper when he picked her up to take her to the hospital. Trevor Condren examined the car at the request of the local police.
If this car had struck a pedestrian, I would have expected to find damage to the bonnet, like such as dented bonnet, drag marks, scrape marks.
But John Button went on trial for murder, and his earlier confession made it an open and shut case. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning to the courtroom with their verdict.
Members of the jury, how do you find the accused? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty, Your Honour.
I'm thinking I'm going home. Could I go now? Could I run for the door? And I decided, well, I better not. I better wait until the judge tells me I can go. So I turned back to the judge.
Order! Order! Oh, terribly sorry, Your Honour. I made a mistake. We find him guilty.
Order! Order!
The judge had to say guilty of what? Guilty of manslaughter.
A manslaughter verdict meant John Button's life had been spared, but he was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in Fremantle prison.
The police succeeded in the jury thinking he was a terrible young man trying to have sex with that beautiful young girl. I've heard that that's what the foreman of the jury said. Hang the bastard, trying to have sex with that beautiful young girl.
Why did I sign that confession? Why did they force me into it? Why did we have that argument with my girlfriend?
Fremantle prison was a relic from Victorian times, with no plumbing, heating, or air conditioning.
You're locked up in a cell with nothing but a mattress on the floor, a rubber bucket in the corner, a plastic plate, and a wooden spoon. A very simple little argument over just a small bit of fish. That's all that it started with.
7 months later, another man arrived at Fremantle prison to await his execution. Eric Edgar Cook had been convicted of killing a young man in cold blood. He had also confessed to other acts of random violence.
Well, Cook confessed to 8 murders and about 12 home invasions in which women were attacked in their beds.
But that wasn't all. Incredibly, Cook also said that he was the one who killed Rosemary Anderson. Cook said he intentionally ran her down when she was walking on the side of the road. For John Button, it was an answer to his prayers.
As soon as my lawyer came in and told me of this confession, I believed then, well, this is it, I'm free, it's only a matter of time.
And for the first time, Button recalled seeing Cook's car pass him when he was looking for Rosemary that night.
What I didn't realise at that very moment, as it's turned out, driving past on the other side of the railroad line at that moment was Eric Cook.
But there were problems with Cook's confession. Police took Cook to the scene of Rosemary Anderson's murder and asked him to identify where the incident took place. Cook pointed to the wrong spot. Police didn't believe Cook's story, so the court denied John Button's appeal.
What should have happened is that the Court of Criminal Appeal should have ordered a retrial of John Button, at which Eric Cook would be the star witness.
Button clung to hope until the day it disappeared, along with the birds gathered on the roof of the prison gallows.
They all of a sudden just fly off into the air as the trapdoor is released. And you know just by that that a person's been hanged.
Eric Edgar Cook was executed.
I knew that once Eric was hanged, that was the end of any chance I had of being released.
The minister attending Cook's execution said Cook took the Bible from his hands and again confessed to Rosemary's murder. But it was of no help to John Button. It would take years before he'd get another chance to prove his innocence. After serving 5 years of a 10-year sentence, John Button was released from prison for good behavior. The first thing he did was visit Rosemary Anderson's grave.
He was out of prison physically, but not out of prison emotionally. He led his life with a big sign over his head, convicted killer, and a big rock in his heart, injustice.
Button eventually got married, had 2 children, found a job, and battled a serious depression.
I desperately wanted to live, but the heartache and the pain of living with the injustice was so intense that I knew that I just wasn't going to make it, that I'd finish up doing something foolish. It was 7 years after I was released, I did do something foolish.
In desperation, Button took an overdose of sleeping pills, got into his car, and drove off a steep embankment at 100 miles an hour. Miraculously, he survived.
From that point on, my life changed completely. And a couple of things that I asked of this God that had watched over me was, would he give me back a life, and would he give me justice in my lifetime?
He wrote to government officials looking for a way to clear his name, with no luck. He even tried writing a book, but no publisher would touch it.
And I remember standing there with the rejection slip in my hand, and I raised my hands up and I said, God, if you want this book written, you better do something. And the phone rang. It was my brother ringing me up to just to mention that he'd been out dancing with a young lady last night, and he told her about the injustice. She wanted to meet me.
The call was about Estelle Blackburn, a journalist and the former government press secretary. She was intrigued by the case and agreed to help investigate Button's story.
I had the skills, and the doors that were slammed shut in his face opened for me. I had the networks and the contacts. I could get the files and everything that he needed. I knew how to research. I was playing a detective. I was investigating a 30-year-old murder, trying to find fresh evidence.
Blackburn wasn't entirely convinced that Button was innocent. She had serious doubts about Eric Cook's credibility.
Now, I lived through the Cook era. I knew Cook didn't run down girls. Cook shot people. And later we learned that he stabbed and strangled as well. But he certainly didn't run down girls.
But in the files of Button's 1964 appeal, Estelle found something surprising, something that had not been widely reported 30 years earlier. 6 women had survived hit-and-run car crashes, and Eric Cook had confessed to being the driver in each of them. Each woman's story was eerily similar to Rosemary's. Young women on dark, isolated roads run down by a stolen car. Estelle eventually wrote her own book about John Button's case, and she too had problems finding a publisher. That is, until she asked her friend, a local newspaper publisher, for help. When Brett Christian read the manuscript, he agreed to personally finance the publication of Blackburn's book.
Having met John, I realised it was just not possible for him to have done it. And it didn't seem, the physics didn't seem right to me either.
Christian also questioned the lack of damage to the front of Button's car.
The police were trying to say that John's little lightweight French Simca had hit a girl hard enough to kill her, and yet there was really no discernible damage on it. Didn't add up, it simply didn't add up.
But could science back up his suspicions? The answer to that question would come from the world's smartest crash test dummy. Estelle Blackburn's book convinced many that John Button was innocent and that serial killer Eric Cook was the one who killed Rosemary Anderson.
Without a legal verdict, I was still classed as a killer, a convicted killer.
His only hope of overturning the verdict was to find new or fresh evidence in this 37-year-old case.
Fresh evidence at law in this jurisdiction is evidence which was not available at the time of the trial, which obviously didn't feature at the time of the trial, and which could not, with reasonable diligence, have been available at the trial.
Publisher Brett Christian believed so strongly in Button's innocence that he searched all over the world for an expert in the new field of forensics called pedestrian crash reconstruction. In Texas, he found Rusty Haight, a former policeman and one of the most respected crash reconstructionists in the field.
Accident reconstruction is an effort to explain how a car crash happened. We use a lot of common sense, some elementary applied physics, and more common sense, and try to piece together the objective information we have for a given car crash to make some sense of it, to sort out how things happened.
When Haight first looked at photographs taken of John Button's car after the accident, he didn't believe there was damage consistent with a fatal collision.
Rosemary Anderson, the girl that was hit by a car, was hit in the range of 30 to 40 miles an hour. And that leaves, that kind of contact with the body leaves distinctive marks on a car. And there were none of those marks on the car that I saw photos of, nothing even close.
The mark would be on the hood because of the way a body moves when hit at that speed.
I think you can envision, a person as they're struck by a car basically wrapping or bending onto the front of the car. The technical term we use when we're describing the trajectory is a wrap trajectory, where the force applied on the body is below the body's center of mass. And so the body's going to bend, usually about the waist, and that's going to leave some sort of mark in the hood.
But in an appeals court, Haight would need more than just an opinion. He would need hard forensic proof. For that, he needed to perform pedestrian crash tests on a 1963 Simca brand car, a model that by this time was 35 years old. Despite the age, Brett Christian found 3 usable cars. He also found a 1963 Holden, the model Eric Cook said he was driving when he killed Rosemary Anderson.
Cook's version is that he drives up behind her and hits her from behind.
A biomedical dummy was used to mimic the reactions of Rosemary's body. Haight suspended it by a fishing line that breaks on impact. The police didn't accept Eric Cook's version of the crash because the exterior sun visor on his car wasn't damaged as one would expect. When Haight's test car struck the dummy from behind, it rolled onto the hood and over the roof, just as Eric Cook had claimed.
But I was focused on the visor. I was focused on the alignment, and then I looked at the visor, and I remember seeing the visor bend when the dummy hit it. And it sent a cold chill up my back. I thought, no, this is not good. It can't be good.
But the visor had snapped back into shape with no damage. This explained why Eric Cook's visor showed no damage when police inspected it.
They actually flex. That's what this visor had done when the body hit it. So now all of a sudden what was kind of a tense moment became, hey, we've done it.
So the dummy did exactly what Cook said. It was just a moment of, wow, this is it, we've done it.
And the dummy landed face down, consistent with how John Button found Rosemary's body. But the tests on John Button's car, the Simca, were even more persuasive.
We found marking at the leading edge of the hood, and more important, we found a big dent, a big depression in the hood, where the dummy had come down and basically smacked its head on the hood. Whether we hit it on the right, more in the center, or on the left, it just didn't matter.
There was no similar damage to Button's car, and each time the dummy landed on its back, inconsistent with the injuries on the front of Rosemary's body. Rusty Haight concluded that John Button did not kill Rosemary Anderson.
So with Estelle's research and with Haight's evidence, we were able to show both of those things. A, it must have been Cook, and B, it could not have been Button. You can't get a much stronger case than that.
This was enough to convince 3 judges on the Supreme Court of West Australia
that the verdict must be regarded as unsafe and unsatisfactory on the ground that there has been a miscarriage of justice.
We went back and corrected a wrong, and we did it with an appropriate use of the forensic evidence, but also a liberal use of good investigative techniques that didn't come from the police, that came from basically lay people.
I think it makes us all a little bit more aware of the fallibility of the system and have a little bit more faith that it can be rectified and that it is possible.
It's the advance of science that's only just been made possible. And the recognition of that branch of science, that is motor vehicle crash reconstruction, that I would say, beyond any doubt, put the seal of success on John Button's case.